Good morning. The Military Personnel Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee will come to order. I want to welcome everyone to our hearing today to discuss the challenges of service members that are facing accessing reproductive health care. The Supreme Court decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned 50 years of precedent and took away the established constitutional right to an abortion. The court stated that their opinion merely returned the issue of abortion to the states and that women can vote for whom they wish to represent their values. But service members do not get to choose where they live. This leaves 230,000 servicewomen who could be ordered to a state that restricts bodily autonomy, jeopardizing our recruitment and retention efforts. There's a map that I want to show you. This map shows the states that restrict abortion in red, along with the number of military installations within those states. As you can see, many bases are in states where abortion is or likely will be restricted. In fact, look at Texas, where we have 19 installations, and Florida, where we have 17 installations. And in both those states, right now, you can't get an abortion under virtually any circumstance. 1/4 of the women will have an abortion before the end of their childbearing years. Of the service women currently serving in the military, we'd expect that more than 50,000 of them would have an abortion during their lifetime. And for many of them, it will be during their years of military service. Even before the Dobbs decision, abortion access has long been a struggle in the military, especially for those overseas and junior enlisted with lower incomes. Under current law, DoD is prohibited from providing abortions except in cases of rape, incest, or threat to the life of the mother. These exceptions are so narrow that DoD has confirmed to me that only between 11 and 21 service members have undergone an abortion at a military facility each year over the past 5 years. Think about that. That means the vast majority of service members are forced to pay out of pocket not only for the care they need, but also for other expenses, including lodging, gas, or airfare, and childcare. The Dobbs decision will no doubt exacerbate these challenges, forcing service members to travel longer distances and shoulder greater financial burdens. That is, if they are granted leave in the first place. Let me be clear. It is inhumane to force women to remain pregnant against their will. It is arrogant to think that we know better than a woman or her doctor about what's best for her body. It is wrong to create government-mandated pregnancies. And I feel so strongly that this is going to discourage women to enlist, to serve, and to remain in the military. It will become, if it hasn't already, become both a recruitment and a retention issue. You can put that down. Access to abortion care is essential to a woman's health and central to their economic and social well-being. The ability to access an abortion should not depend on how much money you have, where you live, or where you are stationed. That's why I've introduced the March for Service Members Act, to enable DoD to provide abortion care once and for all. My office has been inundated with outreach from former and current service members, anxious and despondent about being stationed in states where they can't control their bodies. One Army psychiatrist said to me, and I quote, "Even I and some of my female physician peers in the military, with the relative privilege of being officers and physicians, fear someday receiving orders to a state which has banned abortion. Because of this increased maternal mortality in areas without access to safe and legal abortion, I would not feel safe attempting to become pregnant in such a state, unquote. That is a comment by a physician in the military. At a time when the military is struggling with recruitment and retention, these bans will certainly make matters worse. In the aftermath of the Dobbs ruling, I'm asking the Department of Defense how they are going to ensure service members and their dependents who can access the medical care they need and deserve. We don't know how many service members of reproductive age are living in states with abortion bans. We don't know if service members can be denied leave or retaliated against for needing an abortion. We don't know what guidance medical providers are getting so they can continue performing permissible abortions. We don't know what updated guidance leaders and commanders are being provided when approached by service members seeking leave for medical procedures not covered by TRICARE or offered in their state. We don't know if military treatment facilities will continue carrying all safe and FDA-approved contraceptive methods. With so many unanswered questions, it's no surprise we needed to have this hearing and give service members and medical providers an opportunity to be heard. DoD must act now to provide the right resources at the right time, at the right place, so that service members and their families who have no choice about where they live continue to have access to the reproductive care they need, want, and deserve. As our military members defend our freedoms, we must defend theirs. I want to say to our first panelists how grateful we are that you have come forward, that you've shown the courage that you have, that you are speaking for tens of thousands of women in the military who serve around the world, who are finding themselves in the difficult position of having to make these decisions. The panel one includes 2 service members stationed at home and abroad who will share their personal experiences. Ms. Sharon Arana and Ms. Teresa Mozillo both will share their deeply compelling stories of how impactful access to timely abortion care has been for them. Also on panel one is Dr. Jackie LeMay, an OBGYN currently stationed in Washington State and working in a military hospital, and Dr. Gazela Moyedi, who will tell us how she's supporting service members stationed in Texas seeking reproductive medical care. The second panel will include the Honorable Gil Cisneros, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness, as well as Ms. Celine Mullen, Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. Before hearing from our first panel, let me offer Ranking Member Gallagher an opportunity to make an opening statement.
I thank the Chairwoman. I want to thank all of our witnesses and both panels for being with us today. The mission of the Department of Defense is to provide the military forces needed to deter war and ensure our nation's security. This is a critical mission. On that we all agree. It's enabled by the readiness of the armed forces, which is the ability of the military forces to fight and meet the demands of assigned missions. And the glue that binds mission and readiness together is good order and discipline. As George Washington once wrote, discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable, procures success to the weak, and esteem to all. I start with mission, readiness, and the need for good order and discipline because our military is predicated on men and women following orders. At times that includes going into harm's way if necessary. The Department of Defense and the services, therefore, should not consider a state's laws when making decisions regarding service member assignments, nor should service members be empowered to make assignment decisions based on whether they agree with the state's laws. I personally believe that every human life has innate value, but that shouldn't make any difference in the orders I'm given. Similarly, I should not be able to tell my chain of command where to send me based on whether I agree or disagree with state's laws. With regard to the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson and its direct effect on the Department of Defense, my understanding is there was no change to the federal law that covers medical services available to service members, nor are we suggesting it's necessary. We cannot both maintain a functioning military, however, and allow individuals to choose, as some in Congress have suggested, what installation or assignment they can receive on the basis of a Pentagon bureaucrat's perception of state law. This very issue was debated during our full committee markup, and one of our majority counterparts joined us on that vote. The Senate Armed Services Committee voted 18-8, a strong bipartisan vote, to prohibit the Pentagon from using the agreement or disagreement of a member of the armed forces with the state's laws and regulations applicable to any duty station when determining the duty assignment of the member. Following the markup, Senator Sullivan, the amendment's sponsor, stated, quote, allowing our service members to veto the needs of the service because they disagree with state or local laws could lead to a sorting of the military along ideological lines that would devastate readiness, unit cohesion, and the American people's respect for their military. Senator Tim Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, who voted for the amendment, said that while family considerations are important in assignment decisions, quote, ultimately military personnel officials make the decision best for the defense mission. That is as it should be. I agree with Senator Sullivan, and I agree with Senator Kaine. The bottom line here is that allowing state law to become a factor when making personnel assignments is a very dangerous and unworkable proposition. An apolitical professional military is the hallmark of our American democracy. For our hearing today, I'd like to understand how the Department of Defense will implement the June 28, 2022 policy memorandum from Secretary Austin on ensuring access to essential women's health care services for service members, dependents, beneficiaries, and Department of Defense civilian employees. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. I want to just state for the record, this is not a hearing on whether or not service members should be able to choose where they serve. It's a hearing to determine what we should do to make sure they serve where they're ordered to serve and still can receive reproductive health care. Before we proceed with questions for the witnesses, I want to add that several service members approached my office about wanting to share their stories. Several have submitted statements. I now ask unanimous consent to add those statements to the record of this hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that members from the full committee or other committees who are inclined to participate in this hearing are invited to sit on the dais and participate in the hearing. Without objection, so ordered. To the witnesses, we respectfully ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. Each member will have an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. With that, we welcome Ms. Arana. You may make your opening statement. And you need to push that button to...
Good morning, Chairman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today about service members' reproductive health and readiness. The views expressed in this testimony are my own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. I'm Sharon Arana, a major and intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. I'm a prior enlisted officer with 24.5 years of active duty service. In the summer of 2009, a week before graduating officer training school, I discovered that my birth control had failed. At the time, I was a single mother of 2, recently divorced, and a week from commissioning. When I realized I had missed my period, I asked my partner to take me to buy a home pregnancy test. I didn't want to go to the base clinic to get tested there because it would prompt a profile and my chain of command would instantly be notified of my pregnancy. I also knew the clinic couldn't help me find access to safe abortion. I didn't feel comfortable testing in the dorms where I was living while I was in training. So I ended up taking the pregnancy test alone in a gas station bathroom. My then boyfriend, now husband, and I had agreed that continuing with the pregnancy was not the right decision for us. We were stationed in Alabama, and access to abortion was restricted. So the weekend before we graduated training, we drove 3.5 hours to Atlanta. The morning of my appointment, I learned that Georgia had a 3-day cooling off period, which meant that the first day was only to confirm the pregnancy with both a urine test and an ultrasound that I was forced to watch. I was expected to return to the clinic in 3 days for the abortion, but since I was in training, I needed to return to Alabama to finish my course in order to commission later that week. By chance, I had already planned a trip to my hometown of Brooklyn, New York after my graduation. In New York, I had the access to the health care that I needed and had an abortion. I paid $400 out of pocket, and I recovered at home for a few days while on personal leave before heading for follow-on training in Texas with my 2 children in tow. About 3 weeks after arriving in Texas, I sought further medical care after experiencing bleeding. At the clinic on base, I informed the nurse that I had had an abortion a few weeks prior. While my bleeding was a natural part of my healing process and not harmful to me, my nurse said she would keep my abortion a secret and not add it to my medical records just in case. I was confused, and I felt stigmatized for having an abortion, like I was being judged for the decision that my partner and I had carefully made together. I was never offered any support or follow-on care at the clinic. Rather, I was sent on my way back to training without my pregnancy termination ever documented in my medical records. Choosing to have an abortion was not an easy one, and it was the decision my partner and I made together. My husband and I will be celebrating our 11-year anniversary this year, and we have never doubted that choosing to wait to start our family was the right decision for us. We went on to have 2 more children together when it was right for us and our careers. Our 4 beautiful babies are a testament to the importance of having access to critical health care, including abortion. We are a dual military family that combined has over 40 years serving in active duty, multiple deployments, years stationed apart, missed birthdays and anniversaries, and countless weekends and holidays working missions. And we wouldn't change a thing. I know that if I didn't have an abortion, I would not have been able to continue my training as a single mother and brand new lieutenant going through officer intel school. I also know that it didn't have to be that difficult. I was fortunate enough to come from a state that honors a woman's right to make her own decisions, and I wasn't forced to carry through with a pregnancy against my will. I have put my uniform on for the past 24 and a half years with pride, and I'm honored to be able to continue wearing it. My family and I continue to make sacrifices because we believe in what this nation stands for. I believe that for everyone in this chamber, the health and well-being of my fellow service members and their families should be a top priority. My husband and I would not have been able to continue our military careers had we been forced to carry that pregnancy. And as an unwed mother of 2, geographically separated from my partner and family, I would not be where I am today. Our family, the one at home and in uniform, has benefited because I was able to travel to a state that recognized that family-building decisions were ours alone to make. I thank you for the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you, Ms. Arana. Your testimony is extraordinary, and you're precisely who we want to serve in the military. And to have anyone snuff out that opportunity for just a lack of providing services to our service members is repelling to me. So thank you again for your testimony. Ms. Teresa Mozillo, who's an active duty service member, is joining us via Zoom.
Good morning, Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to appear before you today to share my personal experience. My name is Teresa Ann Mozillo, and I am a major in the United States Air Force. My comments today are my personal story and do not reflect the views of the Department of Defense, Department of the Air Force, United States government, or my current assigned unit, United States European Command. I entered the Air Force as an active duty enlisted member in 2002. 2 weeks ago, I reached 20 years of military service, and I was recently selected for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. I'm extremely proud of my military service. I am thankful for all the opportunities it has provided me throughout my career. Growing up in a lower income family in rural Pennsylvania, the military represented an economic step up in a career path. I joined the United States Air Force to see the world, serve my country, and complete my college education. I'm grateful I have accomplished these goals and so much more. When I heard the news that Roe v. Wade had been overturned, my heart sank. It was then I decided to share my abortion story with others for the very first time. 19 years ago, I discovered I was pregnant at age 21. I was terrified. At the time, I was newly stationed at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri as an Airman First Class, E3. I was fresh out of technical training as an aerospace ground equipment mechanic. I was in my work center for approximately 90 days. I had no social support system established yet, and as a first-term airman, I lived in a dormitory and did not yet have a car. My bi-monthly pay was just over $550. As a relatively shy person, I only made one friend so far. I was a female airman in a male-dominated environment, and the idea of discussing this personal information with my leadership was out of the question. I felt devastated, lost, and alone. My dream of a successful military career was falling apart before I even had a chance to get started. But looking back, I now realize how fortunate I was. At that time, I was fortunate. I did not have to travel far to get an abortion. I was lucky that my only friend on base was willing to drive me to an abortion clinic 90 minutes away along the Missouri and Kansas border. I was lucky the clinic was able to schedule my appointment on Saturday morning, so I bypassed the need to request time off. This would have been a critical hurdle. It was shop policy that airmen in upgrade training were prohibited from taking leave unless it was a compelling reason. I could not imagine having discussed such a personal matter with my male leadership. After my abortion, I had a whole day to recover my dorm room before returning to work that following Monday morning at 7:30. I had access to the reproductive care that I needed, but I had some financial difficulties to overcome. The abortion cost my entire paycheck. I had to wait until my next pay period to repay my friend gas money for driving me to my appointment. I was grateful for having access to the on-base dining facility for meals, and I scraped by on a near-empty bank account until my next paycheck arrived. Without a question, if I had not been able to have an abortion as a junior enlisted member, I would not have had my career and I would not be in front of you today. At the time of my pregnancy, I did not have the financial ability, support, or personal desire to become a single mother serving in the armed forces. I know many strong servicewomen who had succeeded as single mothers, but deep down, I knew that abortion was the right personal decision for me. Today, I'm speaking in support of women in the military who will now have a much harder time to access an abortion than I did. I'm here today to give Airman First Class Mozillo a chance to tell her story, and hopes you consider it when developing policy for women in the armed forces. I'm especially concerned for these junior enlisted members like I was on a tight financial budget who's now stationed in a state that has banned abortion. Many will now need to travel hundreds of miles away to find an available clinic in a state that recognizes the legal right to abortion. Will they be able to afford the transportation and hotel costs, along with the cost of an abortion? Will they need to ask their direct supervisors for leave? Will this knowledge compromise their careers, or will their privacy be respected? Or will their situation become work center gossip? But most importantly, what would their future look like if they didn't have an abortion? In closing, my heart is heavy after the Supreme Court's decision. My story is not unique. I personally know many women who have faced much more difficult circumstances accessing an abortion while serving. It deeply saddens me to know that as I come to the end of my career, my fellow servicewomen must face so many additional barriers and challenges to access the reproductive care they deserve. They might not have the same opportunity to succeed as I did. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify here today on such a critical issue that involves the health and economic well-being of servicewomen and women in general. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Major Mozillo. And like Major Arana, you show extraordinary courage and leadership, and we're very grateful to you for sharing your story. Now we'll hear from Dr. Jackie LeMay, OBGYN at the Naval Medical, who is a Naval Medical Officer. Dr. LeMay?
Oh, yes, sorry, I was having some issues. Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished committee members, thank you for this opportunity to testify. Before I begin, I would like to specify that I'm here today in my personal capacity as a physician. The views expressed in the statement are those of myself and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of the Navy, Department of Defense, or United States government. I'm Dr. Jacqueline LeMay. I'm an active duty Navy gynecologic surgeon and obstetrician and have fellowship training in complex family planning. I've been on active duty for 21 years, and prior to specializing, I spent 5 years in an operational environment as a flight surgeon, including deploying to Afghanistan with the Marines. Both during my time as a flight surgeon and even more so as an OBGYN, I have seen how abortion restrictions impact our servicewomen and active duty families. Active duty women face unique challenges in obtaining full scope reproductive health care, and witnessing this led me both to change my specialty to OBGYN, as well as to pursue additional training in complex family planning. I'm honored to be here today alongside my fellow panelists as they share their personal stories. Abortion care is a part of the full spectrum of reproductive health care and should be available to access no matter one's reason for needing that care. One of the hardest things I do as a physician is tell a family that there is something wrong with their pregnancy. I've had to explain to patients that while ending their pregnancy early was a medical option, it was not something that I could legally provide as a military physician, and I've cried with families after their baby was born and pronounced dead soon afterwards. One person who comes to mind is the wife of an enlisted airman, someone who gave me her consent to share her story today. This was their second overseas tour, far away from family. I still remember the look on the maternal fetal medicine specialist's face when she walked into my office and asked me to join her in talking with the couple about the anomalies she'd seen and their options. Their daughter, Scarlett, had severe malformations that meant she was unlikely to survive until delivery. My patient asked about ending the pregnancy, and we talked about the ways this could be done. I then had to tell them that legally, since her life was not at risk, I was unable to offer her that option in a military facility, and it would not be covered by her health insurance. If she wanted to end the pregnancy, she would have to return to the States and pay for the procedure with no assistance from TRICARE. Her care would cost thousands of dollars, plus the cost of international plane tickets, hotel rooms, and other expenses. There was no way this young enlisted family had the means for that undertaking. Thankfully, she had an amazing friend who set up a fundraiser for the family, and within a few days, they had an overwhelming response and enough money to access the care she needed. When she returned, she told me that everyone in the clinic was wonderful, but she wished that I had been the one that had been there with her throughout this entire process. While my patient in this case was able to get the care she needed, so many of my patients do not. They should not have to share their stories publicly or ask for financial help from strangers. Time is also a concern. For active duty women, they must request leave from their commanding officer, who may deny it or ask for details, forcing them to disclose their personal medical information to someone who is not actually involved in their medical care. I worry about my patients no longer being able to access the care based on where they're stationed. As active duty members, we do not get to choose where we live. We have volunteered to protect our country, and we move every few years from state to state and often overseas to fulfill that mission. We cannot choose the laws under which we are held, depending on our duty station. Our healthcare as military members and dependents should not be based on the current duty station, but on consistent federal standard of care for military members and their dependents. In closing, I want to share how thankful I am for the recent memo from Mr. Cisneros, reaffirming that we in military medicine can and will continue to provide reproductive health care within the scope of federal legislation. But more needs to be done. I urge you to provide federal protection to both patients and physicians who provide these legal and needed services on federal land. I would urge you to go even further. While I truly hope to see the Hyde Amendment overturned, at the very least, I urge Congress to remove the restrictions that do not allow patients to self-pay for abortion procedures at military treatment facilities, as it exists for many other procedures covered by TRICARE. Preventing the same option for abortion services is not only discriminatory, it impacts the readiness of our armed services, and I fear the impact will worsen with unequal state restrictions, that force patients to travel long distances and take leave to obtain the care they deserve and so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. LeMay, for your profound comments. We now welcome Dr. Ghazala Moyadi. She is a Texas-based civilian OBGYN who services service members. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Ghazala Moyedi, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a board-certified OBGYN, a child of Iranian immigrants, a mom, a Texan, and a proud abortion provider. I serve on the board of directors for Physicians for Reproductive Health and Texas Equal Access Fund. Abortion is essential health care. Every person in our country has the human right to decide for themselves when and if to start a family, and that includes members of the armed forces. As an OBGYN, I know firsthand that safe birth, healthy families, and thriving communities require access to abortion care. Abortion bans disproportionately harm structurally oppressed communities and members of the armed forces. Service members and their families are often far from their homes, young, and living on low incomes. Few have the resources needed to emergently access time-sensitive abortion care. While I can talk at length about the impacts of abortion bans on the many communities that I serve, today I will speak about my experiences caring for members of the military. Before becoming a physician, I worked for an abortion provider in Austin near Fort Hood. We routinely cared for service members, and I witnessed the countless obstacles they endured to receive abortion care. They struggled to obtain leave for procedures, get rides to Austin from base, pay for their care, and even get a referral on where to go. Because of the culture created by unjust policies like the Hyde Amendment, the ability to find our clinic often depended on one person on base who was willing to secretly give people our brochure. Essential healthcare for our armed forces hinged on a whisper network. For those who did manage to find us, I can't even begin to describe the pain service members expressed when we would explain, your TRICARE won't cover this. You'll have to pay out of pocket. After becoming a physician, I spent part of my training in gynecologic surgery on base at Fort Bliss. From previously working near Fort Hood, I remembered caring for countless sexual assault survivors at our clinic, even though they technically should have been able to receive that care on base. Once at Fort Bliss, I realized the problem. To actually access abortion care on base, everything must line up perfectly for the survivor. I was only able to care for one such person at Fort Bliss. Thankfully, her commanding officer was supportive, so she was able to obtain the necessary authorization for her abortion. As members of this committee know, it can be incredibly daunting for a service member to report an assault committed by another member of the military. I was grateful that everything worked out for this patient to get the care she needed, but this is not how healthcare should work for members of our military. After residency, I did fellowship in Hawaii, a state with a large military population and a critical healthcare destination for service members stationed in Asia. Hawaii has excellent abortion access, and many residents can receive financial and transportation coverage for their care. That is, except those members of the military. I will never forget weeping after sitting with an enlisted service member who needed to count out quarters to afford her care. She asked me what parts of pain management she could forego so she could afford her abortion. She assured me she was strong enough to not need pain medication. I was changed forever, bearing witness to that injustice. I remember another patient who was raped by a fellow service member while stationed in Asia. Feeling unsafe, she could not report or seek help from her commanding officer. She couldn't find care where she was stationed, and it took several weeks to be able to fly to Hawaii for care. Because of the significant violence she endured, she would have ideally had her abortion under deep sedation, which is not a requirement for safe abortion, but might be necessary for trauma survivors. The access to anesthesia makes the cost of care considerably higher, sometimes over $10,000. Since she was paying out of pocket, she had her abortion with just numbing medicine in our clinic. While I provided skilled and compassionate care, it was devastating to see someone dedicated to serving our country abandoned by it. We wept together after her procedure. I was honored to be trusted with her care, and she should have never been forced to come all the way to me to access her right to an abortion. I'll end by saying that we should all be incredibly angry at the systematic denial of reproductive autonomy that is happening to millions of people in our country as we meet today. Nobody deserves to suffer the indignity of counting quarters to pay for medical care, foregoing medication to alleviate pain, traveling thousands of miles for basic health care, or having whispered conversations about where or how to access care. These things happen every day to our service members and to civilians in every one of your states. I envision a world where everyone has access to culturally relevant abortion care in their own communities. This committee's jurisdiction is the armed forces, so I will implore each of you to at least make this world a reality for our service members. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Doctor. Again, extraordinary testimony. And it pains me, as I'm sure it pains many of us, to hear these stories, but they're real stories. Paying extraordinary sums of money to travel and get an abortion because they can't access an abortion at a medical treatment facility. And to look at the states, again, that have basically banned all abortions and have criminalized the providers for giving women abortions is also compelling as well. Let me start with asking the two physicians this. One of the letters that I received was from an Army psychiatrist, and she wrote, "The risk of postpartum depression can be particularly high for unwanted or unplanned pregnancies and for women under significant stress. Military women are known to have higher rates of unintended pregnancy, oftentimes 125% of the regular population. And they may face unique stressors related to an unplanned pregnancy, including the physical and emotional stress of their work, the effect of pregnancy on one's career, and the difficulties obtaining adequate child care for long and unpredictable work hours. Military women are therefore understandably concerned about access to reproductive health care. Even before Roe was overturned, I worked with female patients distraught about receiving orders to post in Texas after the Texas Heartbeat Act was passed. Some of these women are already in a fragile emotional state and have the self-awareness to realize they are currently ill-equipped to weather the mental and physical stress of pregnancy, much less motherhood. Others are prescribed medications contraindicated in pregnancy, but essential to their mental stability. Female service members may lack the financial means to travel for an abortion. They require permission from their chain of command, even for weekend travel, if it is beyond a certain radius. And they may not trust the military to protect their privacy should they request such travel to obtain an abortion. Even I and some of my female physician peers in the military, with the relative privilege of being officers and physicians, fear someday receiving orders to a state which has banned abortion. Because of the increased maternal mortality in areas without access to safe and legal abortion, I would not feel safe attempting to become pregnant in such a state." So Dr. LeMay and Dr. Mozillo, that's a pretty extraordinary statement from a psychiatrist, a behavioral health provider, about the impacts of state restrictions on health care for service women. As OBGYNs, what are your assessments of the impact of Dobbs' decision on the ability of military and civilian health care providers to provide care to military personnel?
I can take this one if you want, Dr. Moetti. Thank you, Congresswoman. While the recent statement from the Undersecretary makes it clear that we in military medicine can and will continue to provide health care under current federal legislations, there are still many questions that remain, both for patients and for providers in various locations. I'm lucky I'm currently stationed in Washington State, so nothing changes for me. But for some of my colleagues who are stationed in Texas or Florida or Georgia or overseas, there are questions. Most physicians live out in town. So there are questions on if they provide an abortion procedure that is legally allowed, but then go home, can they be arrested? Can they be tried with something? And who's going to help them pay for that? Because the cost of that could be devastating. The same question exists for many of our patients. If they get a legal abortion procedure on base but live in one of these more restricted areas and have bleeding or concerns and go to the emergency room, are they going to be arrested and prosecuted for something that they legally obtained on base? I think that that is one of the questions that still exists and one of the fears that I have heard both from patients and from my colleagues who are in more restricted areas over the last month or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Moyadi?
Thank you. And, I'll add from what you heard in my testimony and what from the other witnesses have testified today, the majority of abortion care provided for members of the military does not happen on base. It happens off base. So when we're talking about a state like Texas, that means that no one right now that is stationed here has access to abortion care. The nearest states, right? What are we talking about? Oklahoma doesn't have abortion care anymore. Arkansas doesn't have abortion care anymore. Alabama doesn't have abortion care anymore. And so we're not just talking about going over to the next city now, which was already a huge hurdle for many, many members of the military, but we're talking about traveling hundreds, thousands of miles to be able to get what is very basic, simple, safe, essential health care. A first trimester abortion takes about 3 to 5 minutes to complete, but someone from Texas stationed at Fort Hood might travel for 2 days to be able to access that procedure now.
Thank you. Major Arana and Major Mozillo, what are some of the barriers facing servicewomen who seek an abortion? And what have you heard from service members about their concerns about being stationed in a state that bans abortion?
Morning. Thank you for the question. So, ma'am, for non-TRICARE covered abortions, there's minimal to no support. While recent changes in the Air Force instructions removed the need for commander's approval for the procedure, members are still left with the burden of taking personal time off, paying for travel, out-of-pocket expenses for the procedure as well. These restrictions also, as mentioned earlier, disproportionately affect training bases, where members have less access to resources and experience additional barriers to travel or leave due to their training status.
Major Mozillo?
Thank you, ma'am. I would say the challenges are extremely worse today. The bi-monthly base pay of an E1 with less than 2 years of service is a little over $900. Even if this service member is ultimately able to reach a clinic, they're going to face significantly longer wait times, increased costs due to the travel, the lodging, the childcare, and more expensive procedures. They could require multiple trips to the clinic, and this would add more and more costs, not to mention more and more time off. How many levels of leadership will the leave requests need to go through? I'm so concerned about their privacy and mental health. Can our junior members afford these costs?
Do you think that this is going to discourage women from serving in the military?
Absolutely.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, just yesterday, I shared this hearing with one of my coworkers, a fellow service member, a man. He shared with me that his wife needed an abortion after an ectopic pregnancy. He stated without timely access to this life-saving procedure, his wife could have died. To see this strong individual, a friend, stand in the hallway with almost having tears in his eyes while he recounted this story, it was so impactful. He could have been an active duty service member with a small child and a widow. This was prior to the reversal of Roe versus Wade. We further discussed the concerns and what if he was stationed in a state that now bans all abortions. Access to reproductive care matters to the life of fellow military members and our families, both male and female, and this court's decision affects us all.
Again, thank you both for your extraordinary participation today. I now yield to the ranking member.
Thank you. I think we all agree that the assignment process, and first of all, thank you all for being here and sharing your stories. The assignment process is the means by which the military makes sure it has people in the right assignments to meet its mission requirements, both in the continental United States and abroad. So the services write orders to Unit X for a service member to go into a billet or a job because there's a military essential task that requires specific skills and knowledge. So looking to the future, let's say you were given the choice to be assigned, and I guess I would ask both Ms. Arana and Ms. Mozillo and Dr. LeMay this question. If you were given the choice to be assigned to an installation based on laws that were favorable to your political beliefs, whether it's a pro-life state or a pro-choice state or something else, let's say a state had a concealed carry law that you didn't agree with, or there's another issue out there. Or maybe there's an office in DoD that's creating an assignment matrix of red and blue states based on existing policies. I mean, as I've articulated, I think the potential ramifications for that and for DoD and the services trying to manage a system like that, and for service members that now need to put sort of politics in their service assignment equation gets unworkable pretty quickly. So I guess my question is whether you think that that personal preference for an assignment should supersede a validated military requirement for your service to assign you where they need you, if that makes sense. I'll start with you, Ms. Arana.
Thank you, sir. So again, we're not talking about assignment and the assignment process here, and I do believe that at the end of the day, it's the needs of the military, because that's why I'm here and that's why I serve. I do believe, though, that as a serving member, I am also owed a standard of care. And we talk about access to health care and standardized health care. That shouldn't change based on the state that I am stationed. I have 4 daughters, and I would hesitate to take any of them to a state where I know that their bodily autonomy is not going to be respected. I don't believe that this is a political issue, as you stated earlier. I believe that a person's health care should be a discussion between the member and their medical provider. Health care shouldn't be politicized. I shouldn't have to be here today telling my private story in this very public forum. But I am here today in the hopes that by telling my story, I humanize this issue and bring to light, highlight that healthcare is not a political issue and it's not about political leanings. It is about understanding that everyone has the right to comprehensive medical care, to include abortion access. And I hope that with this discussion and with this hearing, we can redirect this conversation and understand or accept that the welfare, safety of our service members and their families that are also affected by these policies become the priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mozillo?
Thank you for your question. This is a question of healthcare, not political views. So I can say without a question, if I had not access to an abortion as a junior enlisted service member, I would not have served in your military for the last 20 years. A servicewoman's access to reproductive care should not depend on what state they are stationed to. Texas, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina. They're all homes of large military installations, and now they almost fully or almost ban abortions. Please think of the story I just told you about that male service coworker. This makes me fear for all my fellow service members. I'm sharing my story because I care about access to safe reproductive care, not political views. And I care about my sisters in the armed forces. I believe we all deserve this right, no matter what state the military sends us to. As service members, we defend your freedoms. Please defend mine and my access to reproductive care. Thank you.
Thank you. I only have 30 seconds left, so I apologize to other witnesses. Unfortunately, healthcare, the reality is an intensely political issue, in so much as the political process is how we make decisions on how healthcare should be provided. And that's what we're working through right now, very thorny questions about healthcare should be provided. And the reason I focus on this issue of assignments and whether service member preference should supersede the law of the land is that is what was initially suggested by the Pentagon. And that is what occasioned the debate in this committee and in the Senate. And that's what we're trying to work through in good faith right now. So I look forward to the day when there's a less politicized discussion on healthcare, but it's been my observation in 6 years of being here that it's a very, very difficult topic that requires us to talk about it through the political process. I'm out of time. I apologize.
I thank the gentleman. I have a question. Do you think that service members should have to take personal leave in order to access the health care that's not available to them at their military treatment facility?
Oh, this is a question for me.
Yes.
Do I think that service members should have to take personal leave in order to access, to go get an abortion in a state where it's legal?
Correct.
Well, in the current system right now, would it be illegal for the command to grant them leave to get an abortion in a different state?
I don't, well, we can ask that certainly of the undersecretary, but I think it's the fact that we don't offer the health care at the military treatment facility where they are means that they then have to take what leave they have and use it to get health care, which seems like it's once again another punitive step. And I think you and I are on the same page when you talk about there shouldn't be an ability to pick the state in which you serve. But we have 102 installations right now on that map. 102 installations in the United States in which the states totally ban access to abortion care. I mean, that's an extraordinary number. We have another 29 installations where they're about to ban abortions. So, we've got to take a step back and recognize that you can't, on top of forcing these service members to go large distances to get an abortion, that we're then going to penalize them with the costs associated with the travel and lose their vacation time, what little there is. I mean, we're creating a real incentive for women not to serve, and in some respects, it's almost an insidious effort to encourage women to leave the military, and that's the last thing that I want to say.
I think what we're trying to do here today, and obviously we have disagreements on both sides on this issue, and I'm not I hope you appreciate the spirit in which I'm engaging this debate, is to work through all of the issues and understand what the DoD's proposed policy is, understand all of the issues associated with a post-Dobbs role. My understanding in that particular instance, I think, and Glenn, you can correct me, one issue is that it would run into the Hyde Amendment, right? I mean, we would then have to fund the actual... Potentially. But again, that's what we're working through here today, I think in good faith.
Okay. All right. I thank you for that interchange. I now recognize Ms. Houlihan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really do appreciate the spirit of the conversation. I was that one person who voted on the other side of the aisle that said that we shouldn't be able to pick where we're serving. I served in the military myself, my dad and my grandfather, more than 30-year careers, each of them as well. And I remember being a young girl, moving around almost every single year, and my father would say, we don't get to pick, where we're going. And so I really, really appreciate Ms. Arana. I think you and I share that sort of sense of the needs of the military drive where it is that we need to be. But I am so enormously compelled and appreciative of your testimony, both of you, because when I served, I was a young mother as well. And I remember having very limited leave and not being able to travel. I cannot remember, it was such a long time ago, whether it was 90 miles or 90 minutes without having to request leave. And so that would have certainly limited my opportunities had I needed to make those kinds of decisions for my own health care. And I'm also wondering back to my own mother, who was a military, a Navy mom, as well as my grandmother, Navy mom. and they had their children, in my grandmother's case, 7 children, in my mom's case, 2, what the sorts of decisions and choices that they may have had to make while they were naval moms as well. So I thank you very much for your bravery and your enormously compassionate and articulate expression of this personal journey that you've been on. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about the privacy issues that you, both of you talked about? I remember also struggling with whether or not to share certain issues of mental health while I was active duty. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about why you felt as though you needed to hide or not discuss these kinds of things with your chain of command? Ms. Arana, please.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I believe that in the military, there is still a stigma surrounding this topic. Just, even coming here, and before I was able to come here, and the statement I have to give and make sure that it was understood that these are not the Air Force's views and these are mine personally, it makes it really hard and difficult to talk about this. While we say that, I'm a firm believer we shouldn't be politicizing our healthcare issues. When I am at work, I can talk about my mental health care issues because that is a thing that's encouraged. Let's be open and let's be transparent and let's help one another out. But when we talk about abortion specifically, this is not a topic that is accepted in the office. We don't speak about this. We definitely, it's amongst friends only. You don't advertise it because you don't know who you work for and you don't know what their views are on this. And if you have a supervisor who doesn't support your decisions, it could always come back to you as well and punitively. But yes, it's a very uncomfortable situation to be in. And the fact that we have this culture where our policies also don't support it, that just enforces that stigma, We're not taught to, we're not educated in the military on what our rights and our accesses are with regards to accessing emergency contraceptives or, whether it's rape, incest, or life to the mother that you can have TRICARE. Most people don't know this information because we're not told either. And unless we go out as service members, both men and women, seeking this information ourselves and doing the homework, it's not advertised to the rest of us.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt because I only have one more minute. I have one other question for the doctor as well, which is, would you speak a little bit to miscarriage and to your experience in this particular very, very common occurrence and how both either active duty women or spouses are experiencing that with relationship to abortion access and health care?
So I can speak to miscarriage care in my state off of base. Not having, first of all, restricting abortion access always impacts all pregnancy care. And so the fact that abortion is now illegal in the state of Texas makes pregnancy in general more dangerous. Over the past year, we have been seeing that physicians across the state have been delaying life-saving interventions for miscarriage care because they are worried about how they intersect with the abortion bans in our state. They've also been delaying life-saving interventions for ectopic pregnancy care, again, because they're worried about how abortion bans intersect with the care of pregnancy complications. So it should be a huge concern for service members' spouses that are stationed in states with abortion bans, how they will be treated and how their lives will be valued throughout their pregnancies.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman is recognized, Mr. Kim, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you all for...
Excuse me. I apologize. Mr. Fallon has joined us, so we will turn to Mr. Fallon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions for this panel. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm back. I just want to say thank you from the outset here for all of you and your testimonies. In the 3.5 years or so that I've been here in Congress, I've had a lot of hearings here in this committee room, and I have to say I believe this one to be just at the top in terms of the most powerful ones that I've been a part of. To be able to hear your stories firsthand, I want to thank you for your willingness to come forward and share that with us. It's important for us to hear this For me, I've never served in uniform. I'm not a woman, I'm not a mother. For me to be able to understand your perspective, what you've gone through, your experience, it's invaluable, so I want to say thank you. When I hear your stories, something that really stands out pretty much in every single one is about how some circumstance came about that helped you along this path. Ms. Arana, you talked about how you just happened to be having a trip back to your hometown in Brooklyn. Is that right? And I think Ms. Mozillo mentioned that, just happened that there was, one friend that could bring her forward. And I just get really moved by that just these circumstances just came about, and it just bothers me because it shouldn't have to hinge on just that kind of, for your circumstance, Ms. Arana, just brute luck that you happened to be scheduled. I wanted to ask you, what do you think would have happened had you not had that trip scheduled back home?
Thank you for the question. I know what would have happened is it would have been one of two things. If I would have been forced to carry through with the pregnancy because I was on my way to technical school, to Intel Officer School in Texas, my training either would have been curtailed or I would have been sent to another station. It would have affected the entire path of my career.
And Ms. Mozillo, you told the story about how you didn't know very many people there, and there was one person that was able to drive you. What do you think would have happened had you not met that person, had that person not been willing to help you out?
Thank you for your question. I've thought about that too many times, and many times. I joined the Air Force for an economic step up in a career. Where my life would have went if I didn't have that abortion, I have no idea. And I truly, truly value and credit that abortion provider 19 years ago for where I am today. And I couldn't tell you where my life would be, but I know one thing, I wouldn't be standing here before you today telling my story and trying to make an impact for my fellow servicewomen. Thank you.
Thank you. It just really hits me because, we're here on this committee trying to make sure that you have the services that you need, the infrastructure you need to be able to then serve our nation. And for your own choices to come down to just these circumstances, these happenstance of trips and people to be able to help out, it just shows and reinforces to me just how broken of a system, how we failed you in terms of being able to provide you what you needed. Ms. Arana, you were saying that this was all happening when you were graduating from officer training school, is that right? And I'm sure that a part of that officer training school program was about your physical well-being and training and exercise, is that correct? So obviously, a big part of that was about your health care, about making sure that you're physically fit to be a service member and being able to exercise the duties of that position. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you say that your health care, when it came to having an abortion, that was something that would have affected your well-being, your health care, your ability to be able to do your duty?
Absolutely. I think that, we, as military members, we have a responsibility to remain worldwide deployable. And I think, but yet, when it comes to abortion specifically, we are completely abandoned by the system and left to the luck of where we are stationed, I want to also point out that a lot of our bases right now do not have sufficient obstetrics care for its military members, so even active duty and dependents. And I want to highlight this doesn't just affect me and the women in uniform, it affects the family members as well, the dependents. So we are beholden to civilian services. Out of my 4 kids, only 1 was born in a military hospital, and the other 3 were all in civilian hospitals. So it makes this even more prudent, more important to make sure that we are creating a standard of access of care across the board that is completely lacking right now.
Well, we should have done better for you, and I hope that this committee can do better for many others that are going to experience these types of challenges going forward. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this hearing, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming for attending this hearing, both virtually and in person, for sharing such incredible and powerful stories, for your bravery, for your advocacy, for your selflessness. Dr. Moyayeri, so good to see you again. Thank you for your work in our state. You know, right after, I want to share just very briefly before I ask my questions. I have the incredible privilege of representing Fort Bliss. I represent El Paso, Texas, and Fort Bliss is a critical component of our community as well as a critical military installation. The day after the Supreme Court draft was leaked, my office received a number of calls from female service members stationed at Fort Bliss who were concerned and wanted to know what would happen to them if they were to need abortion care while they were in the state of Texas, while they were in the community of El Paso, while they were stationed at Fort Bliss. And there is so much uncertainty for women around all of this, and there are consequences to these decisions, real life consequences that are potentially deadly for women. You know, we heard about the ectopic pregnancy situation and the impact it has on women and families and the limitations to health care for them. But there are also direct economic impacts for women. Both Major Arana and Major Mozillo shared the impact to their future that lack of access to abortion care would create. And I want to ask both of you, Major Arana and Major Mozillo, ever since the overturning of Wade, ever since the Supreme Court decision, starting with you, Major Arana, what have you heard from fellow service members, from women, maybe even men who care about this issue, who care about women and their future and the future of the military? Have you heard anything from your colleagues?
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. Yes, I've had friends reach out and say that, you know, they're worried, one, about their base stations and what is it that's going to happen when they get there. But I think really overall it's a feeling of understanding that state laws are quickly becoming more restrictive than our DoD regulations. And so what is that going to mean for the rest of us writ large? We talk about bounty laws and what these bounty laws, the effect that that's going to have on our service. When we speak about readiness, you know, these bounty laws, the DoD is a unique employer in that so much of our information is not afforded the same privacy as it is in the civilian sector. And so if we go to states, for example, like Texas, with these bounty laws where service members can sue themselves, can sue one another, it kind of sets us up for this situation that's similar to like don't ask, don't tell, you know, where there was harassment. But I think overall it degrades morale. It affects retention, definitely. And I just think that it doesn't create the environment that we are told we are supposed to uphold for supporting our service members. Thank you.
Thank you, Major Arana. Major Mozillo, have you heard anything from your colleagues, from fellow service members?
Absolutely. And it's just not the personal concerns that we all have, both male and female. The Dobbs decision makes us all scared for the future of the military, the future of the military that I've served in for the last 20 years. I'm worried that these barriers to accessing reproductive care are going to discourage new recruits from joining the military. I'm also worried that current members would leave the military depending on what duty station they are, because that would mean that they're going to risk their access to reproductive care. And I say, you know, it affects the whole family, and it affects all of us, male and female, and it affects the military at large. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that is something so critical for us to understand is the impact on readiness, the impact on the military, the impact on recruitment and retention. We want the best. We want to have a military that's ready, that's lethal, that's focused on what it needs to be focused on. And the situation right now for women does not create those conditions. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Jacobs, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting this incredibly important hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for sharing your stories. You know, as a young woman myself, reproductive health care is also my health care, and I'm sorry that you have to share the very personal details about your health care in order to make a change, and I thank you for doing that. And I also think it's important that we share our stories because we need to destigmatize these issues. This is just healthcare, like all other kinds of healthcare. So I'm very proud to represent San Diego, which is a big military community, and luckily, being in California, my constituents can still get the healthcare that they need. But you know, they have to transfer between bases, as we've already discussed. And we have a lot of young people from San Diego who join the military as a result. And I have to talk to their parents and their loved ones. And they're asking me constantly if I'm doing everything I can to keep them safe. And they don't just mean when they're deployed overseas. So I wanted to ask Ms. Arana, Ms. Mozillo, if you were talking to a young woman right now who was 16 or 17 years old, and they were asking you if they should join the military right now, if it was a good choice for them, what would you advise them?
Thank you for the question. I've never regretted my choice of enlisting or commissioning. I mean, I said 2.5 decades in, and it's always been the exact right decision, you know, for me. So I would never discourage anyone from joining the military. I will say that I am sitting here, and Major Mozillo and my colleagues, we're all here because we believe that we can be better and do better. And one of the ways that we make better decisions or better policies is by focusing on inclusive policy. I think right now what we're working towards is policies that purposefully create barriers and enforce barriers that are already existing. And I think rather we should be looking towards policies that identify barriers to access and tear those down. And that includes access to abortion. I would never discourage anyone from joining the military. This has been an amazing opportunity for me and my family. And again, I believe in what this nation stands for, which is why I wear my uniform with pride.
Thank you. Ms. Mozillo, what would you advise a young woman today?
I also don't regret my military service, but I'm here today to share my personal and private story because I care about servicewomen and the future servicewomen and young women. I want to make sure that they don't experience difficult challenges and that they have the same opportunities that I did. And I want to make sure they have access to abortion care because it's so essential to their well-being. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on something, Ms. Arana, you talked about earlier, which is that there's not enough OBGYNs in military facilities. So, Dr. LeMay, I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, does the department have enough trained gynecologists to meet this moment? What steps could we do to further prioritize on-base OBGYN care and potentially on-base access for abortions that currently would be allowed under law?
Thank you for that question. I cannot speak to policies of the DoD and staffing issues within the DoD, but I do know that we do not currently have the staffing to on base see every patient of reproductive age, whether they're active duty or dependents. So we do rely on our local community to help care for those patients, and much of the OBGYN care in many locations throughout the country does need to be deferred to the network. So we are reliant on that state and the care that can be provided in that state. And that is the reality of the staffing that we have at many locations right now. Thank you.
Dr. Moyadi, do you have anything to add on that from your experiences?
I do, having worked as a civilian near Fort Bliss and also in Hawaii providing OBGYN care, I routinely receive transfers from military installations in both areas. So I know personally from the transfers that I have received that high-risk obstetric care often cannot be cared for on base. Very preterm deliveries cannot be cared for on base. And so many times civilian hospitals are the place where people with complications are sent to for care because there aren't enough beds, there isn't enough staffing. So that is definitely a concern, that this is not just about military installations and the healthcare that they provide, but also about the surrounding healthcare infrastructure that supports the military within our communities.
Well, thank you. And can I just say, for many years, my OBGYN was the only doctor that I went to, much like many young women. And the fact that we can't see every person of reproductive age who should be able to access that care in our military treatment facilities is really problematic and something I hope our committee focuses on. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Spear. We are fortunate, and women in the military are very fortunate that you're the chairperson of this committee. While many members of Congress work on and care deeply about the role of women and the challenges that women have in the military, you are the leader, and we're fortunate that you are there, and I thank you for that. As chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, of which you are a member, you and I and the members of that committee are well aware of the extraordinary challenges that the military has to be ready to perform its duties anywhere in the world. We are increasingly relying upon women joining the military to serve in many different positions, 3 of which we have now seen in this from the witnesses today. I am deeply concerned about the long-term, meaning the near-term and long-term effect that the Dobbs decision is going to have on the readiness of the military, because it most directly, as shown by the testimony of the witnesses today, will have a detrimental effect on the women who are serving in the military and families who are going to be affected by the Dobbs decision. 131 facilities, installations, are in states that are banning abortions in nearly every circumstance. This is going to roll out in a very negative way for the readiness of our military. I don't have questions. The members of your committee have asked profoundly important questions, but I am deeply concerned about what's happening and the ability of our military to perform as a result of the Dobbs decision, as a result of states, 29 I suppose now, who are restricting abortions. So I look forward to continuing to work with you, Chairman Spear. Thank you for your leadership on this.
Gentleman yields back. I thank him for his comments. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vesey, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that we have talked a lot about reproductive rights today. I wanted to specifically ask a question to Ms. Moyetti about contraception and about what's available out there for people that are in the military, particularly since she's in Texas. I would love to know that on Texas basis. I had a really interesting experience at a town hall that I had a few years ago. And there were some people from a local Right to Life chapter that showed up, and they were asking me questions. I said, look, we're not going to agree on abortion, but I said, can we at least agree on trying to prevent unwanted pregnancies or unplanned pregnancies? That would help reduce abortions if you could prevent those particular types of pregnancies. And the guy looked at me and he said, are you a part of the hookup culture? I was really surprised by that response back. And I said, no, I'm not a part of the hookup culture. I'm married. And then he said, well, are you an animal? Because if you can't, the only reason why you would need contraception is because you're an animal and you can't control yourself. That's why people would need contraception. And so that was really one of the first times that I realized that there are people that really do believe that contraception should be just as controversial and just as debated over. This guy that was part of this Right to Life chapter in Tarrant County in Fort Worth, that he really adamantly believed in that. And I just wanted to ask what sort of contraception services, particularly in Texas bases, like what's available Is there a division over these particular services, or do people from all political stripes that serve in the military use these particular services? Ms. Moyadi?
Thank you, Representative. It's Dr. Moyetti. But so I have been proud to provide abortion care for many, many, many people in your district, and I thank you for your service to our communities. I can tell you firsthand that the people of your district have always struggled to access not only abortion care, but contraception care. While I have only worked on one base before, that was Fort Bliss, people on base often had access to contraception and good access to contraception. But like the other panelists have mentioned, the base is not the only place where people receive healthcare, and specifically family planning healthcare. So even though I've only worked on one base providing contraception care, I have provided contraception or attempted to provide contraception to many people who are in the armed forces, their dependents, their spouses off base. And so it's very true that abortion is not the only thing that anti-abortion extremists are looking to limit, that in our state government here in Texas, every single session, we hear anti-abortion extremists also saying that they want to limit or stop access to contraception, that they actually don't understand how contraception works. They often conflate contraception with abortion care. And quite frankly, it is very, very disturbing that many members of our legislature here in Texas also believe these same things. Yeah, I'll end there.
Dr. Moriarty, with that, do you think that there is an opportunity? I mean, one of the Right to Life people that also accompanied to come and initially protest, but I did urge them to sit down and ask me questions as well. A strong believer of the First Amendment. And one of the ladies said that she was a nurse and she was trying to explain to me that IUDs don't actually work. Do you think that there is an opportunity for people that you have met from different political, whether they're right or left, to start having more substantive conversations around the topic of contraception that doesn't delve into these sort of black and white style camps?
Well, I'll say, Representative, that I take care of people from every political party and every religious belief. And so this actually, it's not a political issue in that everyone needs abortion. Republicans need abortion. People who are pro-life need abortion, and I take care of them too. And so while I am happy and proud to serve and take care of anyone, no matter what their beliefs are, I don't engage in arguing with people who fundamentally don't believe in science and who fundamentally believe in white supremacy, right? That I'm not going to argue with those people, but I will provide them healthcare when they need it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Moyadi. Thank you. Yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for allowing me and approving my joining your committee. As my compadre over here said, we're not on your committee, but we certainly have marveled at your leadership on many of these issues on this committee, and this issue is one that's very important to me and to so many Texans. And as the doctor just noted, we're sort of the epicenter for a lot of what's been going on this issue. So I thank you for bringing forward such great witnesses for this hearing. Abortion care is essential to a person's health and is central to their economic and social well-being. A group of extremists across the country have tirelessly fought for the last 50 years to not strip women of their rights to have autonomy over their bodies. And with the help of the Supreme Court, they have finally succeeded. Regretfully, women do deserve better, and particularly those that serve in our military. My district in Houston is about 77% Latino. So it does impact, in my view, minority women, vulnerable populations, poor women, more than any other group. So it's been interesting for me to listen this morning because obviously the additional barriers that are placed on women that live on installations, whether it's no matter what military branch, is very, very concerning to me. Statutory bans in different states prohibit the Department of Defense from providing or paying for abortions in most circumstances. I didn't know that. I'm learning. This is probably now, Madam Chair, I think maybe my third month on this committee. But I can tell you that it's really almost frightening to even think, as my colleague from Texas has said, that there may be restrictions on birth control and IUDs, on the morning after pill, on many others, because this is what opens the door. So I want to, my question is really to the doctors. I have a niece that's a pediatrician. She works in Fort Worth at a community health center. She shares with me sometimes there's a frustration that she has when she can't do something for her patient, whether it's a staffing issue, the lack of a specialist. But for years, this is like so different. I mean, because it's a military folks telling you you can't do something. But I'm sure both doctors are like my niece. They take their Hippocratic oath very seriously, and it pains her when she's got to turn a mama away because she doesn't have the shot available that her child needs. So I just wanted to hear from the doctors on how they feel when they have to turn someone away because they cannot provide a service that they would want to do and that their medical profession would dictate that they do. Either one of the doctors. I want to hear from both, but whoever wants to start first.
Do you want me to take this first? I can take this first. Thank you, Congresswoman. I actually appreciate the question. That is honestly one of the most difficult things for us as physicians in the military, is to have legal restrictions to what we can provide. I'd actually like to share another patient story with you, if I may. I was a flight surgeon prior to the passage of the Shaheen Amendment. So at that time, we could only provide abortion services if the life of the mother was at risk. We could not provide them in cases of rape and incest. And I remember one particular case where one of the women in my squadron was raped at a squadron party. As her squadron doctor, when she found out she was pregnant, she came to me for care. And I had to be the one to tell her that legally we could not provide her abortion at the military hospital that we were at, and she would have to pay for it on her own. She asked me if I could drive her to the local Planned Parenthood after she made an appointment, because she was absolutely positive that she did not want to carry this pregnancy to term after a rape. That's not an unusual thing as a flight surgeon. I would take many of my patients who had medical appointments out in town with specialists to their appointments to help be that liaison. So it was not an unusual request. But when I asked for permission to do that, I was told by my legal officer that I could not, because I was being paid by the Navy. So me driving her was essentially using military funds to help her get her abortion care. The legal officer's recommendation was that she use the duty driver. At this time, there were only a few women within the squadron, so it was most likely that duty driver was going to be male, and very possibly somebody that was at that party that she had been raped at. I can't even express the relief that I had when the Shaheen Amendment passed, and I no longer had to tell patients who came to me with a pregnancy after rape that I could not take care of them. It was an amazing relief to be able to do that. However, I do realize that many of my patients don't actually know that they have that right, and that I can take care of them within a military treatment facility. It breaks my heart to hear how many women still end up going out in town to get the care that they need after rape procedures. The patient that Dr. Moriarty discussed, who could have used general anesthesia, if she had felt comfortable telling her physician that she had been raped and the pregnancy was a result of rape, I or one of my colleagues could have actually provided that anesthesia so that she wasn't paying out of pocket, but she didn't know that, and the military medical system didn't know that she needed that care. And I think that that is one of the big gaps and challenges that we have right now, and it breaks my heart. Thank you.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, Chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Chairwoman Spear, for allowing me to wave on to this morning's hearing. And I want to thank the active duty service members for your courageous testimony. Chairwoman Spear, I am just profoundly moved by the testimony I'm hearing this morning. Just tragic stories. As chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I'm committed to ensuring that our nation and VA continue to support our service members after they no longer are in uniform. So I'd like to ask Ms. Arana and Ms. Mozillo, are you aware that veterans have even less access to abortion counseling and abortion services through VA healthcare than active duty service members do through the Department of Defense?
Thank you, sir, for the question. I have not researched, honestly, about VA rights or services after I'm out of uniform and retirement. I think that, again, it is such a disservice that this is the support or lack of support for members who supposedly are celebrated, right, who are thanked for our service, but yet it feels very performative when those thank yous aren't followed up with actual actionable support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arana. Ms. Mozillo?
Hello. Thank you for your question, sir. Actually, I did know that. I follow the VA healthcare system as a medical service corps officer. I am familiar with the military health system and with the VA as well. And I'm proud of my military service, and it saddens me to know that soon I will end my military career and that I will have to face these challenges and the sacrifices that I made during my career. Those will go unnoticed because I'm a woman and I won't have access to the same care that I did when I was active duty. Thank you.
Well, it makes me concerned that this is one of the reasons why women veterans do not access health care at the VA. They may need the very specialized services in terms of post-traumatic stress and mental health that's very specialized to veterans, but the fact that VA cannot even counsel women about their health care with regard to abortion is very troubling to me. VA is not bound by the Hyde Amendment exemptions that DoD follows for providing abortions to service members only in the case of rape, incest, or the preservation of life of the mother. So VA doesn't do abortions in those cases either. Nonetheless, VA has made its own policy to avoid providing any abortion counseling or services. Ms. Arana and Ms. Mozillo, as service members who will one day be veterans yourselves, do you believe VA should, at the very least, align itself with the Department of Defense and use its authority to provide abortion counseling and services in those limited circumstances?
I believe that all veterans are deserving of a standard of care. And standard of care means comprehensive reproductive care as well, to include abortion.
Thank you. I believe reproductive care is health care and that it should make no difference and it should be included as part of our benefits. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Dr. Lamy, based on your experience as a DoD provider, what guidance should VA provide to its medical staff in the wake of the Dobbs decision? And what are the dangers of VA continuing its policy to avoid providing abortion counseling and care, even in cases of rape, incest, and threats to the mother's life?
Thank you, sir. While I cannot speak directly to policies within the VA, and I have not worked within the VA system, I do believe that reproductive health care and full scope care is primary health care, and we should be allowing our constituents to access it in the full measure, whether or not they're at a military treatment facility or a VA facility. So I hope that both the VA and within military medicine, we're able to continue to expand the access to that very needed and often life-saving reproductive health care for women.
Does it trouble you that, from your ability to counsel women, to just offer them counseling about their options, including women whose lives may have been endangered, does that trouble you that VA can't do that counseling?
I find that very troubling because that is something that I do have to do with my patients very frequently. It's heartbreaking to not be able to always provide the care that patients need if it's not within the federal regulations allowed for us in MTFs, but to not even be able to counsel them and to essentially have a gag order that doesn't let me tell the patient what the full scope of the healthcare that's available or should be available to them is very troubling, and I would find that very disturbing if I was in that situation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry for going over. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Brownlee, the chair of the Health Committee of the Veterans Committee, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I also want to add my sentiments to Ms. Arana and Ms. Mozillo for thanking them for sharing their stories today. Your bravery is truly twofold by serving your country in the military and now serving our nation by coming forward to publicly tell your story. So we are extraordinarily grateful. And Chairwoman Spear, thank you for letting me wave on to the committee this morning. As you mentioned, I'm chair of the Veteran Affairs Health and the Subcommittee, and I also chair the Women's Veterans Task Force. And as the chairman of the VA committee just said, the VA has the most restrictive policy of any federal agency on abortion and abortion counseling. There is a ban on both abortion and abortion counseling, and it is the most restrictive. Even the Bureau of Prisons allow abortions, elective abortions. So prisoners in our federal prisons are allowed elective abortions. They must pay for it, but it is on a sliding scale in terms of what they can afford. So I think I wanted to ask the doctors this question, a little bit different than what the chairman of the VA was asking. And before we go on to the next panel, because I'm sure we will ask them the question about what kind of guidance has come so far, I'm interested to hear from you at this point in our post-Roe world, what guidance and support have you received from the Department of Defense thus far in terms of, how you can best support your patients?
Thank you, ma'am. There was actually a recent statement on the 28th of June from the Undersecretary of Defense, Mr. Cisneros, who did specify that we in military medicine can and will continue to provide full scope reproductive health care within the scope of federal legislation. So in theory, that does mean that we continue to provide the care we have always provided. And for physicians such as myself who are stationed in Washington or California or states without restriction, it does not make a difference. It means that we're continuing to provide the care that we've always been able to provide. I do think that for many of my colleagues that are in more restrictive states, there is still a concern on whether or not they can be prosecuted from the state, even though they are legally allowed to provide these services on the federal land. And that is one of the concerns that exists. And I would encourage the committee to make legislation that protects both the physicians and the patients, regardless of where they are stationed. Thank you.
And I'll just add to that to your point, Representative, and actually to Representative Kim's point earlier as well, that the laws that are currently being passed across the country are also aiming and targeting at helpers. And we heard today how important just one person can be for a service member to be able to access an abortion. But right now, for example, what we're seeing in Texas is that extremists are saying that they want to come after and arrest and prosecute anyone who aids and abets an abortion. So that means anyone that gives you that gas money, anyone that gives you that ride, anyone that helps you arrange that care. And so we're not just talking about a cruel and inhumane ban on a human right to healthcare, but also we are talking about systems that are being put into place to keep neighbors and community members from supporting each other. We should all be worried about what that will mean for the future of our country.
Thank you for that. And to the doctors as well, can you prescribe the abortion pill?
No, you cannot prescribe the abortion pill technically yet because there is what is called a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy on mifepristone and misoprostol. And so the combination drugs that are used in medication abortion must be dispensed through a healthcare facility. You can't go to your local pharmacy or through certain types of registered pharmacies. But for example, in Texas, it cannot be accessed through a pharmacy at all.
Thank you for that, and thank you again, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. This brings to a conclusion our first panel, and I must say it is truly a great privilege for us to have heard from you, Major Arana, Major Mozillo, Dr. LeMay, Dr. Moyede. I've really done a terrible job on your name. Moyede, is that correct? Did I get it right?
Dr. Moyede.
Moyede. You have provided us with great insights into the fractured system that exists in the military for women, one that is untenable and unacceptable, and one that we must fix. So you have provided great information for us, great testimony. Your courage and bravery is to be commended. And with that, we are going to recess. You can go on to the next one. All right. We're going to recess momentarily to bring the next panel on, and we're going to take the testimony from the Undersecretary, and then we will recess after that for the 2 votes and come back. So again, thank you very much. We now welcome our second panel, and we welcome back a friend and former colleague, the Honorable Undersecretary in the Department of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, and Ms. Celine Mullen, the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. So, Undersecretary Cisneros, the floor is yours.
Chairwoman Spear, Ranking Member Gallagher, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the rights and access to reproductive health care of our service members, Department of Defense civilians, and DoD families in light of the June 24, 2022 Supreme Court ruling Dobbs. Joining me today is my Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, Ms. Celine Mullen. Secretary Austin has made clear that nothing is more important than the health and well-being of our service members, civilian workforce, and DoD families. We are committed to taking care of our people and ensuring a ready and resilient force. I want to start by saying that I was deeply moved by the witness testimonies in the previous panel and appreciate them sharing their experiences and concerns. I want to assure them and this committee that the department takes the concerns of our military community seriously, and we, including the services, are doing all we can to provide the health care our service members deserve with focus and compassion. I was particularly moved by the stories about the servicewomen who became pregnant as a result of sexual assault experiences during their time in the military. No one should go through what these women experienced. This is another demonstration of why the department is urgently implementing significant organizational and cultural change to eliminate the scourge of sexual assault in our military. What these stories very clearly highlighted is that we have work to do. We must build a system where our victims feel comfortable coming forward so that they can access all the services they need and are legally entitled to. And victims of sexual assault do not need to report their assault to the leadership to access the care and services, including abortions. There are many resources to help navigate their options. We will continue to publicize this information as widely as possible and continue to professionalize our sexual assault response workforce to ensure victims are receiving the care they need and deserve. Following the Supreme Court's ruling, I sent out a department-wide memo reassuring our service members that the department would continue to provide federally authorized abortions, which we call covered abortions. Service members can receive the same reproductive health care after Dobbs as they did before the ruling. Consistent with long-existing federal law, covered abortions, those cases that involve rape, incest, or where the life of the mother would be endangered, will continue to be authorized to use federal funds and facilities. There is no interruption to this care. I also affirm that our existing policies have not changed. For example, our travel policies related to health care remain the same. Service member who require travel to obtain a covered abortion may travel in official status and are not charged leave. Regular leave can be taken for cases involving non-covered abortion care. The Office of Personnel Management released similar guidance for civilians, reiterating that employees may use sick leave and other forms of leave for these purposes. While our policies have not changed, I did acknowledge that complexities and challenges posed by the court's decision. Dobbs does not affect the care we can provide, but service members are now having to navigate additional challenges to access essential women's health care services. Service members and their families who were previously able to make very personal decisions about when to have a family may now face greater burdens depending on where they are stationed. They may lead to some wanting to leave the military because they do not want to be assigned to a duty station where they cannot access their choice of health care. Other potential impacts include recruitment of women who may have concerns about restrictions to access for reproductive health care and victims of sexual assault who may have added fears of maintaining confidentiality if their only option is to obtain covered abortion through the military health system. These are just some of the complex issues brought on by Dobbs. We understand the very personal nature of how the court's decision impacts families, so we are being very deliberate in analyzing Dobbs with both focus and compassion. We want to make sure we get this right because it impacts access to essential women's health care and reproductive care. Chairwoman Spear, we know that there is still more work to be done, and as we continue to review our policies, I commit to working with you and this committee just as we have always done. We have a solemn obligation to support all those who volunteer to keep our country secure, including service members, civilian employees, and military families. We pledge to do everything we can to ensure that individuals in our military community are able to access the health care they need. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Ms. Mullen, do you have a statement as well?
No, I do not.
All right. I think considering we have a vote on right now, but there's still about 374 members who haven't voted, we will start the questioning. I'm going to reserve my questions to the end, so I'm going to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kim, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much. I know how tough a position we're in right now in terms of how we're trying to figure out to be able to provide care to some of the service members. You know, some of the stories we heard today are reflective of what service members are going through right now. I want to just ask you, what do you need from us? What is it that we should be thinking about here on the Hill to be able to try to open this up? You know, I want to be as crystal clear to my colleagues about what's at stake and the role that we play. I know and appreciate what you outlined, the notices that you've given to our service members right now, to the providers. I know that there's probably more that you want to be able to do, but you know, you're going to need to have us and others be able to step up too. So I wanted to just kind of give you that opportunity right now from the outset.
Thank you, Congressman Kim, for that question. As it's well known, Dobbs created a lot of complexities. As Mr. Garamendi had said earlier, this is like, it was 26, now up to as many as 29 states that we are having to navigate the different laws in each state and to see how it affects our service members in each state. We are currently reviewing our policies and procedures, and we are committed to continue to work with the committee after we finish that process. But the complexity of this issue is really, we need to take the time to go out there to see how each state law affects us. And then, as I've stated, we're willing to come and work with the committee to see how you can best support us. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you take away from this discussion here that there are many of us here eager and willing to help, and we'd like to have a continued and robust conversation, not just today, but going forward, just to make sure that we're on the same page and thinking that through. Another thing that I wanted to ask is, in your statement, you also mentioned that families may experience distress because of these barriers, and it could inflict emotional harm on those seeking care as well as their families. So I just wanted to make sure that we're being mindful about some of the challenges that are being faced in other aspects, especially when it comes to mental health. So I wanted to ask if you have been thinking that through and if there are any additional resources needed for behavioral health services to try to address some of these types of other order effects that are coming from these challenges that service members are facing.
Congressman, you're right. The Dobbs decision not only affects our service members, but also their families. You know, a service member could have a spouse that may need to go seek access to care outside of a state where this type of health care is not permitted. And so it does affect our families. And you know, mental health, behavioral health is an issue that we are very concerned about. The Secretary has said many times that mental health is health, and we are continuing to work with our service members and their families to ensure that they get the mental health care that they need. If any service member does come and desires and needs help, especially around this issue, our medical staff is trained to kind of work with them and to kind of ensure that they seek that help. And with that, I can turn it over to Ms. Mullen, who can speak more in detail about that.
Thank you. I would first like to acknowledge the first witness panel. Those stories for both the providers and from the active duty service women were compelling, and we thank you for sharing their stories with us. First two parts, as regarding to providers, this committee has been very supportive of the increasing behavioral health providers in our system. We acknowledge that that is something that we are working on, and that we have been allowing both additional pay and recruitment activities to try and get more behavioral health providers into our system, both military and civilian. Second, any woman going through counseling for either a covered abortion procedure or any contraceptive care is always asked, or should always be asked, would they would like some additional mental health counseling. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll continue to work together on this, but I appreciate it. With that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Escobar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and many thanks to our panelists here today. Mr. Undersecretary, it's wonderful to see you again. So proud to see you on the other side of the dais, and so proud of the work that you are doing. Thank you for coming to my district last week. I was so bummed to not be there with you and to miss the opportunity to visit with you. But again, thanks to both of you. And as we heard in the prior panel, the impact is real. The impact of the Dobbs decision is profound. And I'm not sure if you caught my own opening remarks, but the day that the draft decision was released, and this was before the final decision was released, my office received a number of calls from women service members at Fort Bliss. And the uncertainty that the draft decision brought about was really challenging for us to navigate, and it was deeply troubling. But I think that now that uncertainty has sunken in for a lot of women in those dozens of states, it is really going to be critical that we provide as much guidance and information and clarity as possible, because that uncertainty is frightening for women. So I'd like to ask you all if you can provide specifics on how you will help female service members navigate and understand their rights, understand the information about where they can access care and help. How do we destigmatize this so that women feel like they have the ability to ask these questions, and so that they're not seeking help outside of their military installations, or not help, but literally information outside of their military installation. So really would love to know what you are doing specifically, but what tools, really kind of piggybacking on what my colleague Mr. Kim mentioned, what tools do you need from us that could really help you with that, while we hopefully seek to create better conditions in the future?
Well, thank you for that question, Congresswoman, and it's good to see you again as well. And unfortunately, I did miss you. We did miss you in El Paso, but it was great to go down to Fort Bliss and visit with the soldiers down there that are dedicated to serving our country, as well as to visit with the people of the great city of El Paso. So, thank you very much for that. One of the reasons that we put out that message on June 28th was to clarify to our service members across the force that despite the Dobbs decision, that we will continue to perform the covered abortions as we are legally able to do, which is in the case of incest, rape, or endangers the life of the mother. And we wanted it to be known that this decision will not affect the health care that we provide at our MTFs. We also sent out a second message to our healthcare providers to let them know that they are able to, despite this decision, they are able to continue to provide the health care that they were able to provide pre-DOBs on our MTFs, and it will not affect them. And as long as they're doing their job, performing it in a federal status, which they are because they're working for the U.S. military in a federal installation, that will not affect the job that they can perform. So we felt it was important to get that out, and we will continue to message with the force. As I said earlier, this Dobbs decision is very complex. Each state is creating their own laws and policies, and so we are looking how it is affecting each state is affecting us, and we want to make sure that when we come, as I said, we are willing, we want to work with the committee, but we want to make sure we are getting it right and taking time to study this before we come to you with asks. So thank you.
Well, please count on us, especially this committee under the leadership of Chairwoman Spear, for what you need. We want to make sure that we are as helpful to our service members because we are all very concerned about retention and recruitment and readiness. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, Mr. Undersecretary. It's great to see you again. In our last panel, we heard that there are not currently enough OBGYNs in the military healthcare system to treat every person of reproductive age who would need that care. We also heard that there was not enough to even do the abortions that are currently covered and allowed under law. So I was wondering what you're doing to make sure that our service members are getting their health care. I mean, I'm a young woman myself, and for many years, my OBGYN was the only doctor I went to. And if that's not care that's available for our service members in military facilities, that's deeply problematic. So what are you doing to make sure that that we have enough OBGYNs, that covered abortions at military facilities will continue uninterrupted, even in states where abortion is being criminalized, and to ensure that those OBGYNs and military personnel are trained so that we can have the full range of contraceptive methods, including IUDs?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. It's good to see you again as well. As the Secretary has stated, Secretary Austin has stated many times, taking care of our people is our top priority. And part of that, of taking care of our people, is ensuring that they have access to essential health care that we are able to provide them, and providing it to them at the best quality health care out there available. There are, it is essential that we have our physicians. There are, of course, shortages. There's a shortage of doctors nationwide. That's no different in the military. But we are doing what we can to make sure that we have access, that every service member, when they go out and when they come to an MTF, that they are seeking health care, that they will get the best quality health care that they can. With that, I can turn it over to Ms. Mullen, who can go into greater detail.
Thank you. Each of our MTFs are staffed by both military and civilian providers, and who are able to deliver reproductive care to all of our men and women. Oftentimes, that specialty care that they are seeking may not be available at the MTF, but as you know, the TRICARE network, which is a private sector care integrated network across the United States, they will be able to provide that care in our network. Every woman will have that ability to get the care that they need either at the MTF or in our network. But also like to say that this week, under Mr. Cisneros' guidance, we have expanded what we have military treatment contraceptive clinics, walk-in clinics. We've had that a bit across the United States with 18. We're now expanding that to all of our MTFs. So a woman or a man could come up, get counseling, and decide what contraceptive they need that day. Thank you.
And would they be able to access IUDs and other
Absolutely,
contraceptives
absolutely,
walk-in
yes.
clinics?
Yes.
With that, I'll also state around IUDs is we are currently updating our policy so that service members and their families will be able to receive those IUDs through the TRICARE healthcare system without having to pay a copay, which is currently the thing right now. So we're changing our policy, updating it so that the copay will be eliminated with that. And the other thing I will mention too, around contraceptives is currently at our boot camps. When women come into boot camp, they do receive a woman's health exam where they're asked about contraceptives. Are they currently taking them? Do they like their current contraceptive? Would they prefer an IUD? Contraceptives is ensuring that's women's health care, and we want to ensure that our service members have access to that health care.
Thank you. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 5 minutes. There are 225 members not voting.
Including us.
Including us, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was about to say Gil. That would be improper.
Not at all, sir, not at all.
I'm delighted to see you in your position. I'm even more delighted to hear your testimony today. You are taking strong steps, not only on this specific issue of abortion, but on women's health care. The testimony you've given thus far would indicate that you intend to continue with that. As chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, together with Ms. Spear, we're deeply concerned about this entire issue of women in the military and the issues surrounding their safety. And Ms. Spear has led us very adroitly in the years she's been chairman of the committee, personnel committee, in dealing with sexual assault and other issues. We note your desire to deal with that issue also, and thank you for that. And now we have the abortion issue to even further compound that situation. My concern here is the overall readiness of our military. We do rely increasingly and appropriately on women in the military. I hope that continues. I am concerned that this issue of abortion may cause some women to rethink and to think that they should not be in the military. So my question to you is, I'd like to hear your view on, do you anticipate the Dobbs decision to reduce the readiness of our military? And if so, how might it do, and what should we do if that is the case?
Well, thank you, Congressman Garamendi. It's a pleasure to see you again. I hope you and your family are doing well. Readiness is a big concern of ours, and of course, readiness, the individual healthcare of our service members is readiness, as many other things that we take into consideration as the readiness of our force. If they're not healthy, they won't be able to perform their duties. I don't want to say it's going to affect readiness, but it is a concern that we have. As you heard in the last panel, I think that one of the majors had said that if she wasn't able to get the abortion when she was in E3, she probably would not have stayed in the military. Retention is also a concern that we have. As Ms. Escobar stated, like, she's heard numerous calls from servicewomen. We've heard those too coming in from service members who are concerned about how this decision is going to affect them. We are working. It is essential for the survivability of our force that we become more diverse. Women are a big part of that. Having a conversation that I recently had with the Secretary of the Navy is that we need more women to join our Navy, and that is essential. And they will make us more inclusive. They will make us a more lethal and better fighting force, and we need them to join our military. And so, we know that this decision is going to have some type of impact, as the Major Arana said, and Major Mozillo, they speak proudly of their military service. They encourage young women to join, and I hope they continue to do that. But I know, and I know they will because they said they will. But to think that some woman may not think twice before joining the military because of the Dobbs decision, it's definitely a concern, sir.
I would ask that you monitor this, provide the statistical analysis, and return to us any information that you might receive and develop on the impact of the Dobbs decision and the 131 installations that are in states that are restricting abortions. And with that information, it may provide additional motivation for the Congress and particularly our committees to provide the necessary support that women need. Thank you so very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. It's really great to see you, and I'll always remember you as part of our freshman class. We had some good times, and now you're on to greener pastures, as they say. But thank you for your presentation, and I think for us, it's we know our brave service members have defended our freedoms, and as elected members of Congress, it's now up to us to defend theirs. And for the women service members, that includes their freedom to decide their own health care decisions. My question is sort of a broader question of, I have visited some installations, different branches, especially many Air Forces. My family is more Air Force than anything else. And it's always struck me that the services that are provided to service members at the different installations aren't always the same. So when it comes to health care, I think it's important that there be as much uniformity and as much access as possible at every installation. So what are we doing to make sure that the health care access is comprehensive, but also uniform throughout the installations, particularly in the 131 that have been mentioned by others as being in states that have bans on abortion or some abortion restrictions at some level?
Ma'am, as stated earlier, taking care of our people in the Department of Defense is our biggest priority. Ensuring that they have access to quality health care is something that I think about on a daily basis, and we want to ensure that all our service members have access throughout the MTFs all over the country and the world that we are legally able to provide. We will continue to do that and ensure that it is granted equally out there. I mean, there will always be instances where there may be a smaller number of service members in one area compared to like an area such as San Antonio, where there's a large number of service members. So the access, what's going to be available is going to be greater in those larger areas and in the smaller ones. But in those situations where a service member may be serving remotely, they are provided TRICARE access to where they can get health care through TRICARE to ensure that they are still receiving quality health care. With that, I'll turn over to Ms. Mullen and see if she has anything else to add.
Thank you. As you know, we have a statutorily defined benefit, which is incredibly very comprehensive. So one, we're very proud of that. Second, this week, under Mr. Cisneros' direction, we set up a dedicated women's health page. As we heard from the witnesses ahead of us, clearly we need to do a better job of, disseminating information, communicating, and educating both our beneficiaries, our providers, and everybody in the military health system. So we're really hoping that this women's health page will be a one-stop shop where a lot of women can go to make sure that they can actually know what their benefits are.
Great. And Mr. Secretary, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you were reviewing all your policies, and that one of them was to ensure that if women have to travel, service members have to travel to another state to get any reproductive health care, that they would be able to do so on official status. Is that what I heard you say, sir?
Ma'am, if a service member is for covered abortions, a service member, we will provide transportation cost for that service member. If for whatever reason they can't get that where they're currently stationed, we will ensure that they get that care and will allow them to travel at cost, as well as provide the procedure for covered abortions.
But will they have to take their time off of their own personal time?
Covered abortions is what's critical here. So only for rape, incest, and life of the mother will they cover the cost.
Okay.
Yeah, for covered abortions, no, they will not have to take time off, take leave for that. That'll be covered through the Department of Defense.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Those are the questions I have, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back, and there are 97 members who have not yet voted. I'm going to ask my final questions, and we will then close the hearing because Mr. Gallagher has other commitments as well. So I want to thank you again, Undersecretary, for being here. I remember you also fondly when you served on this subcommittee as well. There are a couple things that I think we really need to delve into, though. One is a more robust contraception education program within the military. So will you commit to building up that contraception education so that military service members know the difference between all the contraceptions that are available and the Plan B, which is often referred to as morning after pill, which sometimes, and even on this committee, has inappropriately been considered to be an abortifacient, which it truly is not.
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am. It's my time here serving with you fondly on this committee. I think of that very fondly too. So thank you very much for your kind comments. But you know, as I said, ma'am, earlier, currently in the boot camps, we are providing that education with the women's wellness exams, talking to them about contraceptives, explaining the different types of contraceptives, you know, seeing if they want to change, if they like their current contraceptive, would they like to do something different. As Ms. Mullen has also stated, and I'll let her talk more about this in a minute, but you know, we are moving to allow free contraceptives at our MTFs. We currently do it, and it was being done at 18. We are now expanding that to all our MTFs. I think it is essential as we do that. Of course, we need to educate our service members as well, you know, as to types of contraceptives that we can provide. What's the difference between you know, an implant such as an IUD versus pharmaceutical contraceptives versus emergency contraceptives. So with that, yes, I will commit to you that as we expand, we will also expand our education programs around contraceptives. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Mullen for comments.
If you would just pause for a moment. Mr. Garamendi has a question he is curious
Mr.
about.
Secretary, in answer to Ms. Garcia's question, you indicated that a officer could authorize an expenditure to travel to another state for authorized abortions. Some of those authorized abortions appear to be illegal in some states. Could the officer be held criminally liable for assisting in the abortion?
Congressman, again, the complexities of this Dobbs decision has created very many uncertainties, and that is one reason why we are very diligently working with our, you know, Office of General Counsel to examine how each state law might affect what we do within the Department of Defense. But you know, currently the way that it works in the leave policy, well, let me take that back. You know, is the way that we see it, as long as they are performing their legal duties. So a medical provider performing their legal duties at an MTF, advising a service member to, you know, to their options for a covered abortion and that they need to go, is that currently the way that we have looked at it is no, because they are performing their duties in a federal matter, that the state law will not trump over the federal law, sir.
I'll be interested to hear the legal analysis. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
All right. Ms. Mullen, briefly, if you would.
Thank you. As you mentioned earlier, we are very much front and center about trying to communicate better with our beneficiaries, in particular our women, about what their choices are. We're about ready to publish a women's reproductive health survey conducted by RAND. It's the first time that has been done in 30 years. And it's given us quite a bit of information, to include the lack of education about women's options around contraceptives, which are free in our, all active duty service members get free contraceptives within the MTFs and in our retail pharmacies. It is a small copay for our active duty family members, but with your legislation that you are spearheading, we hope to see that change this year. Thank you for that effort. We also do have an app that's called Decide and Be Ready, that men and women can use to go through their contraceptive options, decide what's best for, what's best for them. We also have those walk-in clinics that are newly being expanded this year as well. But as you've mentioned overall, it's sort of astonishing how our young men and women really don't fully know of what their reproductive rights and health care consists of, and we need to do a better job.
And I would also say, Undersecretary, while you are doing that, education with women who are in boot camp, we really need it for the men as well, because truly, you know, we keep losing sight of the fact that there are two in this process, and the burden and responsibilities is rests with just one once she is pregnant. So, and also for service members who, as men, have spouses that should be accessing this. So it's important that we do a much more robust one. We have to do something about the leave that women cannot access. The TDY, I guess, is what you would refer to it, where they are allowed to go to another state to get the abortion and not be docked in terms of leave. We are providing unequal access to women in the military when we have 109 installations in these red states that are banning all abortions, 109 installations. And it could be as many as 134 because there are court cases pending. So there needs to be a way, one, of not docking them for the time that they have to take away, and we've got to deal with this travel issue at some point. And finally, I would say that my concerns about retaliation are real. That needs to be nipped in the bud, and the potential for a commanding officer to refuse to grant the leave because of a religious concern or just because they can refuse. So we can continue this conversation. As you point out, it's a complex decision, but I think there's no question that there is a 14th Amendment violation to women serving at these 109 installations where they cannot access the abortion care nearby. And as we heard from our witnesses earlier today, have to spend thousands of dollars, as much as $10,000, because if you need to have anesthesia, even if it's a DNC or a D&E, you are dealing with very expensive costs. And for these enlisted service members, as you know, they're making very small incomes. So with that, we will continue this conversation. We thank you both for being here and for your commitment to making sure that we maximize the benefits to service members, all service members, and particularly women since the Dobbs case. With that, we stand adjourned.